Oren Soffer, thank you for joining me today on the Creative Gap podcast. It's really wonderful to meet you. And like I said before, really big fan of your work. It's great to be able to speak with you today.
Oh, thanks so much. I really appreciate that. It's great to be here and great to chat with you. Always great to chat.
So normally I like to start with a little bit of like a background, but I've heard you on a couple podcasts speak about your background a little bit. And one of the things that I want to start off with is a bit more of like a potentially philosophical question. Hopefully you could answer.
I love
feel
it
like
already.
as a DP, especially as a beginner, someone that's growing, and to kind of get to the point where you're at shooting, alongside Greg Fraser and shooting some of the highest, end commercials. And I feel like there has to be a level of like self-belief from the beginning. Like undoubtedly you're going to make it to be able to pursue this career. I'm just curious as to what your thoughts are in terms of like in the beginning stages of your career, how much self-belief is there to like really be able to actually pursue this career?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I'll flip the question back to you
Sure.
and pose a slightly different question, which is basically I'll answer this question by asking a different question. And that question is, what is the line? This is philosophical. What is the line between self-confidence and delusion?
Mm,
Like,
right.
and I think that the answer to your question lies like on that line. Like when you're just starting out, there's a part of you that has to be a little delusional, I think, like, or at least a little, you have to be the dreamer. Like you have to be, you know, the kid with nothing to lose and nothing but your future ahead of you, and not bogged down by, I don't know, earthly concerns about, such trivial matters like how do I actually sustain a career? What steps do I take? Like, am I good enough? Will I be good enough? Yeah, you kind of have to like ignore the logic side of your brain, and at least partially not ignore it completely, because answering those questions is important to building a career. But in order to even like take those first steps, I think you have to have that kind of bright-eyed, wide-eyed, bushy-tailed, like almost naive self-belief and
Right.
self-confidence that like I am good enough. I can do this. I will do this. I'll find a way. I
Yeah.
don't need to think about or be burdened by the realities. I'm just going to go for it, right? So this sort of like abandon, I guess, like this reckless abandon. And
Mm,
then as you start to pursue it, the realities start to set in. You start to ask the questions. How do I do it? What is my skill level, and what do I need to improve? What do I need to learn? And so on and so forth, and start building from there. But yeah, I mean, I think if you start off from a place of I'm not good enough, like crippling self-doubt,
mm,
that's going to stop you right in your tracks. And like you can't, it's very tempting to fall into
right.
that trap. And I think obviously it's also really good to be self-critical, not in a negative way, just in a way of like being able to assess your own work, and being able to, you know, understand like what is working, what isn't working, where you need to improve, where you've succeeded in achieving
Yeah.
something. So yeah, like having that self-awareness, I think, is really key. And I do think I see a lot of people, and I mean, I think I've been guilty of this myself in the past, of falling into the crippling self-doubt
Yeah. Me too. Yeah.
trap. But this is the thing. It's everything at the end of the day, it's like this is the case in life. It's like everything is good in moderation. A little bit
Mm,
of self-doubt is good, a little bit, but not too much that it bogs you down. A little bit of self-confidence is important, but not too much that you're arrogant and, completely oblivious to your shortcomings.
mm,
And the pathway is in the middle for everything, I think, is finding balance. A little bit of this, a little bit of that.
mm.
And that's it. That's
Amazing.
my philosophical answer.
Yeah. As you've kind of grown and been able to meet new people and work with new directors and work alongside great DPs as well, and be able to study under some amazing people. What are some like characteristics of a DP that you maybe never thought of as being like a very important part of that role?
Well, early on, I had a really, I was very fortunate to have a kind of mentorship, internship situation with Reed Morano. She was kind of my first,
Wow.
like, big professional cinematographer that I had a chance to work with and learn from. And this was back when I was in film school. So this was like, I basically interned on a couple of her shoots
That's amazing.
as a camera PA. This was my first exposure to any professional shoot, and this was also before she was famous. So
Okay.
she was doing like these pretty scrappy indie films in New York, and I was there like running cable, BNC cable for Video Village, and fetching batteries from the truck and all this stuff.
Love it.
Anyway, working with her, I remember something she said pretty early on that like stuck with me to this day, which is that she was like, especially seeing her navigate sometimes like quite challenging circumstances on these shoots, these indie shoots. And she was like, one really important thing to understand right off the bat is that cinematography is 1/3 art, craft, like the actual cinematography side of it all. And then it's 1/3 technical. And then it's 1/3 psychiatrist, diplomat, confidant, like best friend, shoulder to cry on. Like a big part, almost nearly half of the job really is like dealing with people. And you have to deal with people in different ways. Like you have to be an ally for your director. You have to be their confidant, their psychiatrist, their shoulder to cry on. But you also have to be a diplomat. You have to be like a skilled negotiator. You have to be sometimes, a little aggressive or not, like depending on who you're dealing with when you're dealing with ADs and production and all the other infrastructure of a shoot. And I think in film school at the time, like that's not something I thought about because I was like 100% focused on the technical and the creative.
Yeah, the craft
like
kind
those
of. Yeah.
those two sides. Yeah, the craft and both, in its artistic expression and in its technical expression. But then seeing these professional shoots and seeing all these scenarios and situations that Reed had to navigate to deal with people, and that was really eye-opening, I think, early on, to be like, oh wow, there really is a whole other side of this that you can't really discount.
Did it initially scare you?
Well, any human interaction is scary to anybody, I think, unless you're like naturally an extrovert,
Right.
which most cinematographers are not. That's why we're behind the camera.
True.
But it's a skill set I feel like you just have to pick up on, like, as time goes on. It just becomes a part of it and becomes a part of the process. But I do think, and again, I do see in other people, like when they're starting out, again, that crippling self-doubt and all of that, I also see like a lack of self-confidence in human interaction and like how you present yourself to a producer or whatever and advocate for yourself or your crew or whatever it is. And that's okay. Like, I think that's natural early on, but that is something that's worth like focusing on and being deliberate about developing, because I do think that is a huge part of like building a successful cinematography career. I mean, it's politics. Like there's a whole side of it that's politics, that is being a politician and learning how to communicate with people, how to advocate for yourself, how to sell things, how to convince people to do stuff. Like it's a whole side of it, and I think it is really crucial. So yeah, and I've certainly seen that manifest in some of the other people I've worked with and also in my own career. So yeah.
Once you started your journey into cinematography compared to where you are now, has your passion for it wavered in any way? Have there been moments in your journey where you're like, maybe this isn't for me, but like towards, I mean, I guess where you're at now, like how much of your passion for cinematography has stayed the same, increased, or kind of like went down as you've potentially gone through different phases of the career?
Honestly, it stayed the same. And I think that's key to answering the kind of self-doubt question, because that's kind of like whenever I'm faced personally with this internal question, and whenever other people ask me for advice, like on this question of what do I do? I'm feeling stuck. I'm not sure I'm going to, succeed, or I'm not sure I'm going to be able to make it or pursue this career in the way that I imagined or envisioned for myself. And it's really difficult and hard, and finding the opportunities and pushing through the moments of difficulty and self-doubt. And the thing that I always go back to is this, and I go back to this with myself, and this is what I recommend other people do, is you have to really sit with yourself and ask, like, okay, if I'm really being honest with myself, could I live if I gave up, if I stopped because it was too hard and went to do something else, can I live with that? Like,
Right.
would that feel like a relief, or would that feel like worse?
Right.
And if the answer is worse, if the answer is like, I just can't let go of this, I can't see myself, imagine myself not doing this, then that's the answer. And that is how I've felt about it the whole time. I just, like, my passion for it and love of the art form and interest and love of pursuing this and drive and ambition has never let up at any point. And so I think that that's always that's the answer to myself, like whenever I'm faced with that same question. And I think it is worth checking in, on yourself to make sure that that passion is still there. But for me, it never went away. And I think that's probably why I kept going
Right.
and got to where I am now.
That's kind of like part of that first part of like having like that undeniable self-belief that you're going to make it regardless of what happens.
Yeah. And the flip side of it is also, it's not even that self-belief. It's also this like, okay, well, but if I flip it on its head and look at it from the other direction, I'm like, what can I do? Like, I can't see myself not doing this.
Right.
So I really have no choice but to keep going. Like, even if I don't have that self-belief, it's like, it doesn't matter, because what's the alternative? There isn't one. I can't imagine one for myself. So onwards we go. Like, but that's basically how it's going.
I say there's something I say to myself all the time. I think my dad might have told me this when I was kind of pursuing this and like maybe wanted to quit at one point. He was like, "Your plan A should be your plan B through Z," meaning that your backup plan there shouldn't be a backup plan. Like you're
Exactly.
going to figure it out. You're going to go through challenges. You're going to go through hardship. You're going to have success, but all of that comes, mountains, valleys. All of it is a part of the process. And I think that saying for me helps me a lot in moments of like, is this worth it, really?
Yeah, 100%. I read a quote recently from a director that I really liked. And it was very succinct, and I'm probably going to get it wrong, but I should have looked it up. But this is the quote, essentially. It's you have to, if you want to pursue this, if you want to go all the way in this career, you have to love the art form, you have to love the craft, and you have to love what you do more than you hate the hustle. Like, if at any point you hate the hustle more than you love the end goal, you're
It's a
done.
bad sign.
Like, that's the sign. But as long as your love for it supersedes how difficult and annoying the hustle is, and the setbacks and the long drawn out process of it all, then that's what you have to go off of, So
Love that.
I do think for myself, it never went away, and I'm very grateful for that.
Do you ever think about the longevity of this career? I don't know what your viewpoint is on like having a family one day. And I know, Greg has a family. I believe Reed, I think she has kids of her own. Like,
Yeah.
what is your viewpoint on longevity? Because I just got married. I eventually want to have a kid, children, hopefully one day. And I think that's something
Yeah.
that is like important for me to think about. And I know, there's a lot of fear in this industry of like relationships not working, families not working. But I see some successes in this industry.
Yeah. I mean, my answer to that, I guess, is like, you don't have to look in the industry to find relationships that don't work, right?
Right.
Like, relationships work or don't work based on like 100 different factors. And in as someone who's in the industry, there's a specific set of challenges, right, that we need to kind of meet in order to make something like that work. A long-term balance and harmony in your relationship and with kids and everything. But that's not, I don't think it's like extra hard in the film industry. It's just a specific set of circumstances, right?
Right.
And those specific circumstances require specific answers, like in order to make it work. So it's the same thing, I would say, with any relationship and any, like it's always challenging to be in a relationship, to have kids, like no matter what you do, unless you're independently wealthy, I suppose.
Sure.
But
Yeah, right.
even then, I'm sure there's other challenges that I don't even know or think of. Not to, it's easy to sit and say like, well, some people just don't have any problems, but everyone has problems.
Yeah.
And the point is, you know the parameters and you know the needs, right, for how to make it work. So you just have to make it work and find that way. And I think I actually really enjoyed 2 interviews that I heard, one more recently than the other, but check out Ava Berkovsky's interview on the Cinematography Salon podcast. Right. Not to shamelessly plug, because I was
I listened to that podcast.
In that podcast, but they did a great interview with Ava, and Ava touched on, I think, a perspective on the kind of quote unquote work-life balance that I had only heard once before, and they called this out in that interview, that the person that we've both heard this from before is Mandy Walker, who we also had on that podcast, and who I also consider a mentor and colleague and friend. Very fortunate to be able to say that. And both of them have what I think is a unique perspective on it, which is that it's very tempting and very easy to kind of look at the quote unquote work-life balance as like 2 opposing forces that are at odds with each other. Like you have your personal life and then you have your work, and you have to find a way to equalize between them. And what they were saying is like, no, that's actually the wrong way to think about it, because what you need to think about is, how do you harmonize? How does your work and your life, how do they complement and complete each other to become one unit, one entity? It's not about this versus that. It's about like finding that unique pathway. Obviously, our job is unique compared to your typical 9 to 5. So it just requires a different set of circumstances to, find that harmony. But it is ultimately all about that, and communicating with your partner and everything. And I mean, there's certain telltale signs. Like, I think it's fairly obvious to say that, if you find yourself in a relationship with a partner who doesn't understand or appreciate that the nature of freelance, the volatile nature of that kind of schedule, the fact that you'll need to be gone sometimes, and like has any resentment or holds that against you or anything like that, that is, a problem to address in that relationship, and a communication issue that you need to work on. But that's not to say that is inherently a problem. It just means that that's the unique way you need to kind of focus on and find a way to navigate to make that work, right? So yeah, I think that's what I would say. And I've definitely heard some really good advice, and I really liked the idea of reframing it as 2 things that are at odds.
Harmonizing.
Yeah. It's not 2 things in your life that are at odds with each other. It's just about, they're both equal parts of your life, and you have to find a way to find the synthesis between them. Right.
Love that.
Yeah.
You touched on freelance, and I know that a lot of people love to kind of talk about what to do and how to deal with times when you're slow, and like, how to manage your mental health. But I want to kind of ask you a question in terms of like, when you're really busy, how much work is too much work for you to be able to like give your all as a DP? And I think there's been moments where I've experienced this, where I've been getting booked for jobs that, like, left and right, and it feels great, but I'm like, am I actually giving my all to this one job, or like, am I spreading myself too thin? I think that's something that I don't really hear very often, is how much work is too much work?
Well, I think that answer varies per person.
Yeah.
For me, I am very self-aware and very prone to overload and burnout. So I set very clear, very specific boundaries for myself. I have never double dipped. I've never done two jobs back to back, like literally going from one to the other, from one day to the next. I always put a little buffer in between. I'm just very self-conscious and cognizant of that, of my own kind of boundaries and limitations in that regard. I know other people who do that stuff all the time. They double dip. They go from an overnight to a different shoot the next day. They don't sleep. And some people seem perfectly perfunctory and fine doing that. I can't do it. So like I just have very clear cut boundaries that I set for myself a long time ago that, maybe has cost me a job or two here or there, but the overall benefit of not feeling overwhelmed, I think, is worth it.
Yeah. And do you give every job you feel like an equal amount of work towards it, especially in pre-production? Something I'm figuring out is like, is there like, do certain jobs require a little bit less? Like they might not need all of the pre-production that I want to give, and some require all of it.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, every job has its own needs, and I think as time goes on, you become more and more kind of in tune with how much needs to go towards each job, and like so. For example, actually, I have two upcoming commercial jobs. So this is really the perfect circumstance to talk about this, and I don't say that just to brag or anything, but just using it as an example. Because one of them is like a fairly simple, straightforward, like run and gun style spot. One location. It's, very nimble, small crew, quick on our feet. So the lighting approach is going to be very simplistic, and it's location based, and it's all like based on available light that we're just lightly augmenting and stuff like that.
Right.
So I already know those circumstances going into that job. So once I put in the initial work of like, all right, here's the crew, here's the equipment we need, I'll see you on the scout. There isn't really much else for me to do, honestly. Like, we're going to scout it. We're going to come up with our lighting plan for each space on the day based on the available light in the location that we're shooting in. And then I'll see you on the shoot day. It's pretty straightforward. And I know when and where I need to put in the effort to, get what I need. Like as of right now, I've done everything I can until we scout. There's no additional thought or mental space I need to put into this job, because what is it going to help me? There's no decision I can make now until I see the location physically, and we talk through it with the gaffer and the director and everything. So now I've checked off that mental checklist for that job, and it's in the bin until the scout. The other job that I'm prepping is more complex. It's 3 days. It's on stage. It's set builds. It's production design. Okay. So that requires a heavier lift. So that one is now something I put more time into, because as the set renders are coming in, I'm starting to think about lighting approach for each one. There's different scenes. There's different looks in the piece. So it's a little more complex. There's more moving parts. There's more components, and there's more... and therefore it requires a bit more of a heavy lift. So I give that one a little bit more time on the prep end, because there is more thought that I can put into it beforehand. And, the other simpler, more straightforward job is simpler and more straightforward.
Right.
And I think each one on the shoot day will get the same amount of concentration and effort. And I think ultimately that's what matters and what it comes down to. And I don't even... That's not even something I'm necessarily intentional about. It's just I can't help it. Like even on the most vanilla, I guess is a good term, job, or the simplest job. Yeah. Maybe this goes back to my kind of passion for the whole thing, but like I just can't help. I can't phone it in. I'm like incapable of phoning it in, which sounds like one of those silly questions on like an interview, like a resume interview when you interview for a job, and they're like, and they ask you like, what's one flaw, what's one like personality flaw? Exactly. And you're like, I take my job too seriously, and I just can't phone it in. I have to give my 110% every time. But in this case, it does feel that way. Like it does feel like something that I can't help, which I think is a good thing. I mean, I certainly lean into that.
Yeah.
And I just this is what I like. I'm sure any artist will relate to this. I like the satisfaction of doing a good job.
Yes.
Like there's
Absolutely.
there's a feeling of satisfaction and like not relief, but wholeness, like completion. This
Right.
just like pride, and it's a mix of a bunch of different emotions.
I'm like
When you
smiling
know,
because I know that feeling when you're driving home from set and you're like,
yeah,
today was a great day. Like you feel great.
even in the moment,
Yeah, right.
like this, and
Absolutely.
this is what I mean by like the most vanilla thing. Like even if it's like a corporate interview, you know, like low stakes, nobody's ever
Hmm.
going to see this, but you set it, you have a nice lighting setup in your head and you execute it and you do it and it looks great. In that moment, you look at the monitor and you're like, oh, that looks nice.
Right.
And that makes
I
me
love
feel
that.
good. Like that makes me feel
Mm.
whole and complete and satisfied. And I love that feeling. And I feel like most artists love that feeling. It's that feeling of satisfaction when you've done something, when you've
Mm.
made something. And no matter the job, I just like that feeling. So I don't like the feeling of half-assing something or phoning something in. I just don't enjoy it. It feels incomplete. It doesn't feel satisfying, so I can't do it.
I love that. You said, between the balance of that job that requires more of your effort in pre-production versus the one that
Yeah.
is a little bit more simple. How do you feel about in terms of growth as a DP, niching down to like a specific style or being open to different styles of shooting? Or I guess like how have you managed the different jobs that have come your way? Do you say yes to certain things because that's the avenue you want, or are you saying yes to a bunch of different things to be able to get the experience of all different types of work?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think I have to split the answer into commercial and narrative,
Sure.
because I have two different goals and two different tracks for each one.
Mm,
I think for commercial, which I sort of view as like my day job, essentially, like that's my bread and butter. Um, I do commercials so that I can be deliberate and choosy on the narrative side, which I'll get to. But on the commercial side, yeah, I think I don't really discriminate based on creative. Like I
mm,
think there are other factors that I take into account when I'm deciding whether or not to take on a commercial. And so even if there's creative that either I'm not particularly interested in or I don't find particularly challenging or particularly, like new or scary or
mm,
interesting or even like aesthetically pleasing, um, I would still, consider taking a commercial because of the rate, because it's a
mm.
job, or
Absolutely.
because I've had
Yeah.
a slow month, or because I have a good relationship with the director and the production company, or because I want a good relationship with the director and
Mm,
production company. So I'm willing to kind of to go back to that term, more vanilla job in order to kind of establish that. So I think all of those are factors that come into play. I don't necessarily take on commercials in order to branch out, and also that doesn't even tend to really happen because commercials tends to become like a self-fulfilling prophecy where you start getting commercials based on the ones you've already shot.
right.
So you start to kind of find your niche a little bit, and that's not to say that you can't break out of it. I certainly would love to do other things, but you take the opportunities that you get, right? Narrative that is a different story though, because I think with narrative, which I really consider the kind of main focus and the more
Mm.
long-term goal
Vision.
oriented
Yeah.
career track for myself, like that's why I got into film. I loved movies as a kid and all that, so like that's my real focus, goal, and passion. So on the narrative side, I mean, I feel a little bit differently about it, which is that I do have like a certain aesthetic um, tendencies or elements that I'm drawn to as an artist, like as a cinematographer.
Mm.
that interest me, and not just visually aesthetic, also from a storytelling perspective, like from a narrative perspective, like what is the tone of the project and all that stuff. Like, and it's not particularly narrow. I think it's transcends genre. It's like all different genres and all sorts of things. But there's, I guess, just a certain level of like depth and complexity and darkness, both visually and metaphorically, that I'm
Right.
just interested in and drawn to. That when I'm making choices about what narrative projects to take on, I'm certainly deliberate about like gravitating towards stuff that I find interesting.
Mm.
And also stuff that I find challenging. Like I think once you this is more aspirational, but this is something Greg Fraser has talked about that I really admire. I think maybe I'm not there yet in my own career, but I hope to be. When, deliberating or deciding like what project to take on next in the narrative world,
Right.
something Greg has always said is he's like, I don't like taking on a project that doesn't make me a little bit scared, like that doesn't have an
Cool.
element of
Mm.
danger to it, or like something I haven't done before, or something that scares me about it. And if it's like you're just taking a project on the narrative side because it's easy or because it's comfortable or familiar, then you're doing it wrong, basically. Like that's not how to build, a career that continues to kind of challenge yourself and surprise yourself and grow.
Mm.
So I really like that advice, and I do consider that when I'm taking narrative work, or considering taking narrative work. But yeah, it just, there's two different considerations between
Sure.
commercials and narrative, so I have to kind of separate it. But hopefully that
And
makes sense.
yeah, for the narrative, because that's something that I am pursuing a little bit more. I had a feature come out uh, about a month or so ago, and I've
Oh,
had some
fantastic.
features come my way, and I've kind of turned them all down for various reasons.
Yeah.
But I think
Hmm.
the one thing that I struggle with, and I don't know if it's, I'm not repped yet. I don't have an agent. So I'm doing a lot of these decisions myself, and I'm struggling to find a, like, why don't I feel good about this project? Like, what are those red flags? Like, why
Hmm.
am I feeling nervous about it because I'm just unsure of the director, or like, I think that's something that I haven't really figured out yet, is like, am I nervous because it's not a good job, or am I nervous because this is something I haven't done yet?
Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah, I think this is how I would look at it, right? Um, there's the nervous system is fascinating. Like the human nervous
Mm.
system is really interesting because like we have physiological nervous system responses that are, this is all like wired into our, brain patterns, our DNA, the way we're built, that are designed to protect us, right? Like so our nervous system reactions are similar when stimulated from both sides of the coin. Danger and excitement. Like the
Right.
line is very thin. And excitement, things that are designed to excite us do so because they're actually like hacking our nervous system. A
Mm.
roller coaster, a horror movie, like all of these
True.
things that generate excitement, like adrenaline, bungee jumping, whatever. Those are exciting to us actually because they activate our fear center, right? Like that's the whole
Mm.
point. And so, but they're designed to activate it without going over the line. Now, for some people, they have different levels of tolerance, right? So that's how you end up with some people who are like, "Oh, I just can't watch any horror movie. It's too scary. It crosses the line from exciting to danger, and it's
Mm.
too intense, and I don't like that feeling." Same with roller coasters, but most people find those things exhilarating, right?
Yeah.
So finding that line is really important, that center. And once you've done that, now you can start to assess and analyze like your own nervous system reaction to things. Am I
Mm.
reacting to something? Do I have a nervous reaction out of excitement? Is it like butterflies? Is it nerves because I'm excited about something? Or is it nerves because I feel like I'm in danger? And figuring that out, it's not easy. I
Yeah.
still question it all the time. But you have to be able to like turn on your analytical brain a little bit when you're faced with that, and really assess and ask yourself, like, okay, does this project make me nervous because I'm excited about it, and I'm worried, I'm like anxious, will I do a good job? Will I be able to step up to the plate? Will I succeed? Will I whatever? Those are all good. Those are good nerves.
Absolutely.
Those are like motivating nerves. The other one is, am I nervous about other people? Am I nervous that this will be a bad experience? Am I nervous that, there's something wrong, like there's something bad with how this is set up, there's red flags in the production, like I can think ahead and imagine the difficulties, the challenges, not in the positive way, but like the things I'm going to have to deal with, the things that I'm facing. Those are the two sides of that coin. And this is a really unsatisfying answer, but I have found over time, I've been doing this for 10 years professionally now, that like I really just need to trust my gut. This is non-scientific, and I'm a very scientific, analytic person, but for whatever reason, I believe in the metaphorical, like that there's a second brain in your stomach idea. Again, there isn't actually a second brain in your stomach, but there's something about, I don't know. I wish somebody, I'm sure, has written a paper about this, but like I actually wish I could understand what that gut feeling is that people get. But I get gut feelings all the time, and I like get gut feelings about projects. I have a good feeling about this. I have a bad feeling about this.
Yeah.
And in the past, every time I've brain analyticed my way to justify saying yes to a project that my gut said no, I got burned. Like I was like, ugh, should have listened to my gut. Like what's wrong with me? And so I've as time has gone on, listened to my gut more, and I'm better for it. So I think, it's good to tap into that, listen to your gut, find your gut feeling about things. Sometimes it transcends logical analytics, and you just have to go on vibes.
I want to read a quote that I read from an article for the creator. It says, Greg's criteria for a DP was a DP with great sensibilities who could also step back and let Gareth do his thing and support him in his vision, adding, I told Oren there might be days when he wouldn't talk to Gareth for 5 or 6 hours, I said, and if he's off in his own bubble working with the actors and shooting, that's a good thing. And then let me see. You said the initial call from Greg was surreal. He laid out a crazy pitch. It was going to be a documentary style guerrilla filmmaking, minimal lighting, minimal crew. I guess this kind of ties into the previous question of when you first got that initial pitch, from I guess from a DP's perspective, hearing that you might not be with the director's going to be shooting, that has to be kind of a little frightening at first. Was your gut initially, oh, this is I mean, I guess because Greg is reaching out to you, it's going to be a great project, but that has to be a bit of a unique experience and a challenge for you as a DP to kind of let go of that ego, maybe, and that you have to be in control.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I mean, the creator was sort of the perfect example of what I was just talking about, where it was there was a lot of head, brain, logic alarms of this is scary. This is nerve-wracking. This is, for many reasons, not just, the specific circumstances of the shoot being so different and unique and something I haven't experienced, but also I look up to Greg. I look up to Gareth. And now the pressure's on me to deliver, right? That's super nerve-wracking. But there was never an easier gut reaction to something in my life. I mean, it's it wasn't even a question. It was the most easy and obvious yes you could ever imagine, and so that was exactly this matter of reframing the nervousness as excitement, as we're kind of entering the unknown a little bit, and to find the exhilaration in that instead of the fear, right? And what really helped me with that too is Greg was in the same boat, right? Greg had never done a project like this
True.
before, both in the way that it was filmed and also having a co-DP and having someone on set, and he wasn't going to be on set. And this was all new to all of us. Like none of us had ever made a project like this. In fact, I mean, going into it, like even Greg and Gareth were openly admitting like this whole thing could not work. I mean, we have this theory of how you can make a movie. Like there's a theory of how you can make a big budget, like big canvas blockbuster with a minimal crew and bring a lot of the scope in post. And they tried the theory out on Rogue One a little bit wherever they could, but they're working in such a big machine that there's only so much of that you can do. And so ever since that shoot, they had talked about like, oh, one day, like we'll find a way to go all the way with it. We'll do a whole movie like that. We'll fully commit. As Greg says, burn the ships, like you're just going to burn the ships. But I think he like really enjoys that. Like, I think Greg especially just really gets an exhilaration from forging into the unknown and just kind of trying something and being like, well, let's try it. Like, let's just do it. It's scary because it hasn't been done, but that doesn't mean it won't work. It just means we got to deliver, we got to focus, and we have to make sure that we're living up to our own expectations of ourselves. And that was really exhilarating for me too. I just totally like got swept up in that energy. Like it was excitement, and it was never fear. It was never crippling fear. It was always exhilaration and excitement and acceptance that, some parts of this won't work. Some things will fail, and that's good. That's okay. Like we learned from that. It was great. It was great. And it was very much an egoless experience. And we talked about that. I mean, we had, direct conversations about how this is like a process that requires ego death in the best way possible. Like that's just going to be a big component of this project. And again, I just found that exhilarating, and I really learned a lot from that. And yeah.
Right. How do you think that mentality of kind of like egoless or just like kind of surrendering to the project has affected you moving forward?
To be honest, I had felt that way about projects before, but I guess I just didn't really have the terminology for it until this project. But once Greg, Gareth, and I were actually just openly talking about it, using those terms, it really became clear. Like I've always felt, and now I guess it just doubled down. The whole process made me double down on these feelings. Feeling that there really isn't a place for the cinematographer's ego in a project. I mean, I would argue there isn't a place for a director's ego either. There really shouldn't be a place for personal ego at all. Everything we do and all the decisions that we make on set, in prep, and post, everything is all in service to the project and the vision for the project. Now, the vision is the director's, right? So there's a little bit of ego, not in a bad way, but just, there is a singular vision, hopefully, that everybody gets on board with. But I think still the best ones are collaborative. It's a singular vision, but you're open to input, and you're open to people tapping into and understanding that vision and helping and providing ideas and thoughts that enhance, but sometimes contradict maybe a thought that you had. And like, that's where the personal ego can get in the way. And you have to let that go. Like it's all in service of the project, and in service of ultimately the audience, which I think is an equally important factor to consider. Is like, we're making a film, and our allegiance is to the film and the vision. But the vision is there in order to create an experience for the audience. The end goal is, how does this feel, and what does this do for the person watching it? That's the most important thing. So yeah, it hasn't changed anything for me, but it's just made me really double down on thinking about it in that way.
Do you think that there's a balance between ego and kind of believing in your decision to pursue something on set, for example? Like if the director or like you're trying to figure out some framing, you're trying to figure out a scene, and it's just like the director wants to do something in particular, but you know that this will work better. Is there a balance of like, is that your ego or is that you serving the story the best? Like, how do you find that balance of pushing back against a decision, but also then kind of surrendering to potentially the director's idea?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we work for the director.
Right.
So all you can do in that circumstance is if you think that a certain idea is better for the story, pitch it, advocate for it,
Mm.
explain why you think it's better. And ultimately, it's the director's call. That's it. If you want to be the final arbiter of those
Yeah.
decisions, become a director.
Become a
Like
director.
it's not really our place to do that.
Mm.
If you really, really, really believe in something, like that it's better, then there's a very simple solution usually, which is like, well, let's just shoot it both ways. It's
Mm.
going to cost what, an extra minute to get an alternate take where you do it this way versus that way. Like, let's just do it both ways. And sometimes you're right, and sometimes you're wrong.
Hmm.
And you won't know until the edit is the thing. Like, you won't know. The director
Right.
won't know either. Is
True.
the other thing.
Yeah. That's a good point.
So again, a good director, I think, will hear that and go, okay, let's try it both ways. And
Mm.
the editor, third party arbiter, will see
Right.
who. And
Unbiased. Yeah.
yeah, well, and again, the editor isn't making, again, or shouldn't be making choices based on their own personal ego either. They should be making
Mm.
choices based on what works best for the cut, for the movie.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Can you kind of speak to patience a little bit? Because I think it maybe goes back to the beginning a little bit, but looking at, for example, the creator as like if for some instance I got hit up to do that project, I wouldn't be so unprepared. Like where I am in my career, I'm not there yet.
Yeah.
If I were to want, like, my dream is to shoot a project like that. My dream is to shoot those big movies, the big shows. But I know that if I were given that opportunity right now, I don't think I have the life experience to actually accomplish that project well enough yet. Like, how important is understanding that your growth as like a human and your life experiences directly impacts, I guess, your availability to actually do a project well at a certain scale.
I think it's very important, but I guess the other part I would say is like going all the way back to the first question about that sort of self-confidence and almost maybe delusion or naivety.
Mm,
I think that's important too, because if you completely limit yourself or cut yourself off from opportunities because you don't think you're ready, when will you ever be ready? Like,
right.
sometimes you do just kind of have to dive into things and see what happens. Like, on paper, I maybe didn't have the experience for the creator. Like, you could make an argument for it, but I felt ready inside. I was like, I could
Mm,
do this, and this is my dream, is doing these kinds of movies. So like, I'm not going to let my own lack of physical experience being on an $80 million movie set like
right.
limit me stepping up to the plate. It puts more pressure on myself, but part of it is you kind of just have to dive off the diving board a little bit. And I guess the only way to know the answer is to look within. Like, you just have to
Yeah.
know if you genuinely feel ready. And if you
Mm,
don't, that's totally fair and that's totally fine. But I don't know. It's about, as with everything, it's a balance.
mm,
It's a balance. But patience is important. I mean, just big picture, like, patience is really important, both on set, like day to day, but also in terms of the longevity of a career. Like, and it's hard. I think that's hard for our generation, like, and younger. It's just
yeah.
anybody who grew up in the internet age. We were raised to be impatient. Everything
Yep.
in our lives caters towards impatience and immediate satisfaction and gratification. And so being patient in our careers and thinking long term and all that is like antithetical to our nature
Mm,
as, people raised on the internet. But I do think it's really important to remember that. And I think a lot of anxiety and antsiness around people's careers comes from that impatience and that feeling of like, why am I not further? Why can't I get to the
right.
goal faster? And da da da. But it obviously doesn't work that way, not in the film industry. So
Mm,
yeah, developing that, I think, is really important. That patience,
mm.
it's really, really key.
I know we're running a little bit out of time soon, but do you feel that part of your growth as a DP has come from you recognizing that you need to kind of step out of your comfort zone on certain projects? Um, for example, I think I noticed for me that I became pretty stagnant in what I was creating. And I think I realized that I was just, whenever I get commercials, I was just kind of shooting the boards, shooting what the agency gave. And I was being more of just like a person that, like a yes man, potentially. But once I realized that, why aren't my projects looking the way I want? I was like, maybe it's me. Maybe it's not the projects that I'm given. Maybe it's just me not pushing the director, pushing the producer, or just like really trying to elevate something.
I always push.
Yeah.
I'm always pushing. Like even on like I said, those vanilla jobs. And I think it just goes back to like, I don't get the satisfaction from not pushing.
Not pushing. Right.
So I push
Mm.
within reason. I mean, on a commercial, at the end of the day, we are there to shoot the boards.
Yeah.
So I guess on a commercial, it's more like a nudge. Like you nudge, but if you encounter resistance, then it's very easy to say like, okay, this is not one of those push jobs. We're gonna do what they want. We're gonna shoot the boards. It'll be high key and bright and boring.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's fine. I'm getting paid and I'm doing what I love. So, I'm still happy either way. But I do always try to push, but within reason. And I'm not unreasonable about it.
Last question is, if you're sitting across the table from that version of you that was on set with Reed Moreno, that, first time on set, and
Yeah.
you're sitting across from where you are now after shooting, a plethora of amazing projects, what advice would you give that younger version of you?
Be patient and stop looking at other people's social media.
Right. It's a good one.
Ugh, how much time we wasted.
Yep.
Completely pointless. I mean, the two are related, like being patient and focusing on yourself.
Mm.
I think that's the advice I would have given myself 12 years ago.
Yeah.
Not that it didn't work out, but still could have saved me some gray hairs, I suppose.
Right. Amazing. Well, thank you. I know we're cutting a little bit into your time, but I appreciate you coming on today. And
Yeah, not at all.
Where can people find you? Share, whatever you'd like, social media, website.
Yeah. Well, I'm very easy to find. I have a website, orensoffer.com, and you can find me on social media as well by searching my name, Oren Soffer
Amazing.
DP. I'm all over it, for better and worse.
Right. Thank you. All right. It was great
Awesome.
speaking with you today.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me on.
All
This
right.
is great.
Of course. Hopefully you enjoyed today's episode. Peace out.